Good evening from ABC News headquarters in New York. I'm Howard K. Smith. Frank Reynolds is on assignment in Indochina. These are tonight's headlines. 4 students killed at Kent State University in Ohio during a confrontation with the National Guard at a war protest rally. The Pentagon announces that the Air Force made strikes in 3 areas of North Vietnam in recent days, but has no plans for more. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee accuses the administration of fighting a constitutionally unauthorized presidential war in Indochina. And President Kosygin expresses indignation over Cambodia and questions President Nixon's logic and motives in sending troops there. Reports tonight from John Hambrick on the fatal confrontation at Kent State, Bill Gill on a White House maneuver to get favorable mail on Cambodia, John Scally on why President Nixon has stepped up the fighting, Don Baker with the American forces in the Fishhook area of Cambodia, Bill Lawrence on the close Republican primary race for the senatorial nomination in Ohio, and tonight's comment on a time for decision in an indecisive war. The active, large-scale American and South Vietnamese participation in the fighting in Cambodia has brought a cry of anger from many college campuses. On Saturday night, demonstrators at Kent State University in Ohio burned the ROTC building to the ground. There was more trouble over the weekend, and today the protest turned into a riot with thousands of demonstrators facing National Guardsmen and police. Someone, possibly a sniper, started shooting, and a few minutes later, 4 protesters, 2 women and 2 men, were dead. For a report, here is John Hambrick of station WEWS in Cleveland.
4 people were killed on that campus early this afternoon, and over a dozen injured. It all began when some 3,000 students defied an order not to assemble on the campus, and 300 National Guardsmen moved in to disperse the demonstrators with tear gas. Nobody is exactly sure what prompted the action, but the National Guardsmen opened fire. Some unconfirmed reports have it that the guard was fired upon first by snipers, and that Guardsmen returned that fire. Newswatch reporters got these reactions from students who described what they saw.
The students were protesting and walking around here. They had tear gas. They were throwing it back and forth. National Guard was throwing the tear gas at the students, and the students were throwing it back. National Guard were marching up this hill. They turned around, got on their knees, and fired.
Did you actually see any of the students being hit?
I saw people fall. I don't know if they're being hit or if they just, scared and just dropped in the dust. I don't know.
Do you have any idea what caused it, why the shooting started in the first place?
Some of the students were throwing rocks at the National Guard.
What about the report that there was a sniper here? Did you hear anything about that?
No, I was on top of Johnson Wolf, and they said there was a sniper up there, and I was there, and there was none at all.
Did you see any sniper activity around in this area?
No, I didn't, except that was just pointed out by one of the faculty members when I looked at the monument. The bullet hole did come from, it looks like, a back position somewhere over in here.
So conceivably it would probably come from where the students had been.
Yes, it does look that way.
At the White House, the president issued a statement saying that he shares the sadness of the parents of those killed, and he added, quote, "This should remind us all once again that when dissent turns to violence, it invites tragedy." There were less violent protests today from Columbia University in the east to Stanford in the west, and the National Student Association has called for a nationwide shutdown of universities beginning tomorrow. I'll have more news in a moment.
What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? Want to get out of that mess quick and easy? Use Easy Off, the oven cleaner with 33% more power cleaner than another leading brand. Easy Off removes the toughest grease. You just wipe it off. Works best in warm ovens or in cold ovens. Easy Off with 33% more power cleaner. Comes in aerosol can and paste jar.
Harper's Bazaar says, with knitted sweaters, wear knitted pants.
Wash them in Woolite.
17 says, knitted sweaters are made for knitted skirts.
Wash them in Woolite. Woolite safely soaks all washable knits clean in 3 minutes without shrinking, fading, stretching. For crochets, double knits, pantyhose, for all washable knits, the makers of over 30 million fine garments recommend cold water Woolite. Safely soaks knits clean in 3 minutes.
Of the two acts by which the president changed the shape of the war last week, the first, the attack in Cambodia, continues, but the second, the intense new bombing of North Vietnam, was stopped today. ABC Pentagon correspondent Roger Peterson reports.
The massive airstrikes against North Vietnam, anywhere from 50 to more than 100 planes per mission, are classified as reinforced protective reaction. Defense Secretary Laird has this rationale for the airstrikes.
These protective reaction strikes have been carried on in order to protect our pilots. We have no further missions planned. The flights have been terminated, but they would, of course, resume should the North Vietnamese attack any of our aircraft that are flying reconnaissance missions.
Can you tell us how many sites were hit?
There were 3 areas that were hit where substantial anti-aircraft fire had been involved: the Bartholomew Pass area, the Ban Paria Pass area, and the route just west of the DMZ between Laos and going into North Vietnam.
Note the location of one target area, Bartholomew Pass. It's only 150 miles from Hanoi, above the 19th parallel, once the limit for strikes north. Thus, the reinforced protective reaction airstrikes are the deepest and heaviest penetrations into North Vietnam since the bombing halt announcement of November 1968. Since the halt, 10 aircraft have been shot down over North Vietnam, but the 9th was downed last January. The 10th announced late Saturday and believed part of the massive raids. Why the necessity then for the raids this past weekend? The Pentagon says it's concerned with the threat of the guns. Not said is that the raids properly topped off a week where we saw the definition of protective reaction escalate from firing artillery shells across a border to U.S. troops in Cambodia. Roger Peterson, ABC News, Washington.
Last week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee asked for a private meeting with the president to talk about Cambodia, the first time such a request had been made in 50 years. The response was an invitation from the White House not only to the Foreign Relations Committee, but to the members of 3 other key congressional committees as well. Today, the senators sent back their answer. ABC Capitol Hill correspondent Bob Clark has the story.
The Foreign Relations Committee actually fired off 2 replies to the president. First, in a display of icily correct manners, committee members accepted his invitation to the White House, but said they'll regard it as a briefing rather than the consultation they asked for. Then the committee released this report, which declares Mr. Nixon is conducting a constitutionally unauthorized presidential war in Indochina that ignores the powers of Congress. Senator Fulbright spoke for the committee.
The committee met and decided that to accept the individual invitations, and urged all members whose schedule permitted, to accept the invitation to meet for a briefing tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock.
Senator, do you now feel that the Congress should seriously consider using the power of the purse to restore its control over the war?
I do, and it's the purpose of the resolutions and amendments that I referred to is to do that. And I think the time is approaching, or is here, in which this matter should be raised.
Senator Fulbright's committee decided today to hold hearings on a proposal to cut off all funds for waging the Cambodian offensive. But Fulbright himself is not optimistic about using this congressional power over the purse strings to end the war, since it lays members of Congress open to the charge of failing to support American troops in the field. Bob Clark, ABC News on Capitol Hill.
The majority of the voices that spoke out in Congress last week were highly critical of the president's Cambodian decision, but at the same time, the White House reported a great mass of phone calls and messages running about 6-1 in his favor. Today, some new facts were revealed that put those White House figures in doubt. ABC's Bill Gill reports.
The Republican National Committee has admitted that it did, in effect, rig some of the public response to the president's address on Cambodia. It has been learned that GOP supporters across the country were called upon to recruit at least 10 persons to listen to the president and then call the White House with their approval. Operating on the chain letter technique, each of those people were to call upon 10 friends to continue the process. In attempting a head count of the possible contacts, the mathematics become staggering. Starting with a conservative figure of 25 calls to Republican leaders in each state, they would have contacted 1,250 people. A second series of contacts would have brought 12,500 calls. They in turn could have reached 125,000 potential supporters. They in turn could call upon a potential 1,250,000 supporters. And from there on, the arithmetic becomes incomprehensible. This chain letter technique, used with White House approval, was first employed to solicit support for Mr. Nixon's November 3rd speech on Vietnam. Then it was perfected for use in last Thursday's Cambodian address. Bill Gill, ABC News, the White House.
I'll be back with more on Cambodia in a moment.
This woman has what every woman wants: soft hands and hard nails. No lotion can give you both. Only gloves can help. Playtex gloves. They're fully lined to keep your hands safe from water that's too hot, rough cleansers, detergent that's too strong. Yes, only gloves can help you have both soft hands and hard nails. Playtex gloves. So flexible, you can pick up a dime.
Alfonso and I just can't seem to get together anymore.
This'll help. The Playtex Cross Your Heart stretch bra.
Stretch?
Yes, it stretches on the sides and back so you can swing out. You're more comfortable. It even crosses your heart with stretch to lift and separate.
The Playtex Cross Your Heart stretch bra. It stretches so you can.
I'm ready, Alfonso. Alfonso?
The president's moves in Cambodia brought strong words from around the communist world today. China denounced them as a mad provocation, and Peking promised to support the communists in Indochina with all its strength. In Paris, the chief negotiator of the North Vietnamese said that his country must now review its position at the peace talks. And in Moscow, Premier Kosygin did something extremely unusual for a Russian leader. He called a news conference. ABC's Irv Chapman was there.
In the ceremonial House of Receptions in the Lenin Hills overlooking Moscow, Prime Minister Kosygin called his first Moscow news conference to denounce the American decision to enter Cambodia. He said the U.S. aim was to liquidate progressive regimes, and this aggressive imperialist goal is doomed to failure. Kosygin warned that the escalation in Indochina could bring more tension in East-West relations. And he cast doubt on the value of agreements with the U.S., which violated the Geneva Accords, he said, so easily. He said the Vienna SALT talks would go on in serious fashion, despite the blow to Soviet confidence in the United States. Kosygin, however, rejected suggestions for a new international conference on Indochina. He said this was a time not for conferences, but for action, though he would not spell out what action, of any, the Soviet Union itself contemplates. Kosygin scoffed at the presence of North Vietnamese in Cambodia and added harsh words about America's scorched earth policy there. All in all, it was rather like a public scolding for America's bad international conduct and an effort to put the Soviet Union at the head of those who oppose it. This is Irv Chapman, ABC News, Moscow.
Under heavy pressure from the left wing of the Labour Party, the British Parliament agreed today to hold a full-dress debate on Cambodia tomorrow. So far, the only official British action has been to call for a new international conference. The streets of London this past week were full of the sounds of protest. ABC's Howard Tuckner reports.
These anti-war demonstrations had been planned for weeks, but they gained impetus and support since President Nixon's decision to send American troops into Cambodia. 5 different demonstrations went on simultaneously in London. Demonstration leaders said the marches also were meant to protest the British government's official silence on the American action in Cambodia, to put pressure on Prime Minister Wilson's government. About 500 demonstrators moved toward the American embassy. Police had expected violence, and 500 of them were on duty. A delegation of British trade unionists and politicians, headed by Christopher Norwood, a member of Parliament, delivered a note to the U.S. Embassy strongly protesting the war and the American involvement in Cambodia.
We demand that the United States cease its aggression in Southeast Asia and allow the peoples of that area to solve their problems.
A group of American radicals carrying a Viet Cong flag tried to make a personal protest at the embassy. The Americans were allowed to speak to an embassy officer on duty, but said they got no explanation of why U.S. troops were sent into Cambodia. Howard Tuckner, ABC News, London.
Noisy reactions like that around the world were one of the considerations weighed by the president before moving into Cambodia. But a more important factor was the long-range